All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our April edition of the American Standard Circuit, Sunstone Circuits webinar. I think we have a really exciting topic for you today with some guest speakers. Um, so joining me today will be our good friends from Screaming Circuits. Um, Kelly, if you want to flip the slide over to the speakers. Um, so joining me today, Matt Stevenson. I'm Sunstone Circuits. I've been here for almost 20 years, various roles here at Sunstone Circuits, and been in the industry, it seems like forever. But joining me today, Kellie Schwab, the VP of e-commerce at Screaming Circuits, and Vitaly Michalchuk, the customer service manager. So welcome to these two fine individuals. They will try and impart as much wisdom onto the group as possible from the assembly side, and then we'll try and bring it all together for the entire PCBA assembly. So I think it's going to be exciting. We'll probably hold questions till the end and try and answer those at the end. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat feature in the Zoom app, and we'll try and get to those towards the end. And unless there's anything else, we will move right along. So Kelly, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today as we go through the topic of scaling prototypes to production. This is a topic that is really close to our hearts and our customers, just because we started out with Screaming Circuits being primarily a prototype service. And as we found over the years, as our customers have asked us to help them grow and scale into more production volumes. So what we wanted to do today was just provide some tips that we have learned along the way to guide through the process of going from prototypes and into production as your product is going through that life cycle curve. We're going to be going through topics such as documentation and communication, why that's important, some areas that we recommend focusing on, also some design considerations, both from a fab standpoint. We'll have Matt join in and give some of his recommendations, and then also on the assembly side as well, just for that smooth transition going out of prototype and into production. We'll also touch on material and component selection, and also areas like regulatory compliance, which may not be applicable as you're prototyping, but for sure as you're starting to produce into volumes, many times we're seeing switches in there where there's going to be more requirements, and we just want to make sure that the team is prepped both from the customer standpoint and from ours. And then also we will go through just a high-level discussion just on testing and the quality assurance piece, and wrap up with some Q&A. So we'll start with an overview on scaling into production. Many folks, when they reach out to us, they say, we have our prototypes, we're ready to go, what next? So the planning stage can actually happen in parallel to prototyping. During that time, as the prototypes are running through the production phase, there's some good opportunities for discussions about what is working well, how are the components placing, how is the design set up for manufacturing and assembly processes? Are there components that may be in areas on the circuit board that may be a little bit more difficult for the processing stage, or maybe more prone to rework? How is it set up for really large scaling for once production time hits, and test might be a discussion down the road? Those are areas where to start planning, get those conversations going, and really get that collaboration starting with your assembly teams, and have some of the feedback mechanisms in place to be able to have those conversations. So from Screaming Circuits and from Sunstone, we found with our partnership, it really is a collaboration, a partnership between customer and supplier to be able to walk through what we're seeing during quoting, during assembly, after, once the once the circuit boards arrive and our customers' teams are starting to work with them and putting them in applications, how are things working? What needs to change? So that's why the planning is so important. And that's from the assembly piece and then even from the material selection and sourcing piece as well, which we'll touch on later. The benefits out of that is being able to have smooth assembly and delivery processes, less rework, and also there's cost benefits as well. The sooner that we can get into the assembly process, streamline it, then that takes out more of the variability and also can be an opportunity for some cost savings as well. So where do we start? We start at the beginning. We start at design and we start at quoting. So to be able to get in design and to quoting, what we recommend is as you're going through and the designs are either at the prototype and you're making some changes, maybe you received your first assembly order back, you have your 5 pieces, 10 pieces. If everything is working good, then you just take one last look at your documentation. If there was some feedback from your assembly partner or from your fab partner, those are the times to make sure that the documentation is getting updated to be able to provide an accurate and consistent quote. So going back and having that documentation be in the living document from an assembly standpoint is something that will help ramping into production. Also, while communicating and documenting, there's also areas on there, not just for PCB design, and Matt, that's on in your area with your team, but what we look for is what other documentation do you have for assembly that will help with the assembly team be able to accurately and successfully run the boards through. So we're looking for any type of unique instructions that may have come through during the design stage and really around the quality standards as well. If you're taking a look at production and you know that there is going to be some additional quality standards that your end application is going to need, to have that information provided up front as well, so we can help on that journey. I had already touched on the collaborative style, but if there's any questions along the assembly process from prototyping and wondering, okay, what can be done to have some efficiencies put in place for scaling, get with the team, schedule some meetings, have engineers on your assembly team meet with your engineers, have supply chain partners meet. What we do is we tend to do a lot of pairing up, having our purchasing representative meet with a representative from customer, have a quality person meet with a customer's quality representative. It's really having that synergy between the two organizations as we're scaling up, so we're on the same page and running it like a project and being able to check in and see that we're always in alignment as we're growing. And that's that feedback mechanism. How's the feedback coming? Is it coming through weekly meetings? Is it coming through updates? Is it through emails? Making sure that what we're learning along the way from the prototype and scaling up, that we're sharing, it's being documented, and we're resolving any potential issues before we scale, and we have a multiplier on any open items. Next would be the design considerations, and I'm going to tag in Vitaly on this one as well, as he works with our customers as they are onboarding with customer service and with our engineering team. So Vitaly, on the design considerations, what have you found as customers were starting to scale up that was helpful from a design consideration standpoint?
I'll always ask for feedback. I mean, I think Kelly touched base on that on the previous slide. Is, you know, if you're not getting feedback from your assembly partner or from your fab partner, request that. Work with them closely to see what you need to do in order to drive costs out and improve your design. And then you know, take the feedback and see what else can be done.
Okay. What are you finding when customers are going from the prototyping into scaling up, really with the component placement? Because there have been conversations I know that I've joined in with as well as we're running through, right? And we have some of our engineers that are asking what could be different, or if they're having to make any adjustments to design for component placement. Because that starts getting into fixtures and tooling sometimes, right?
Yes. So, like I said, work with your assembly partner closely. Request their DFA, DFM recommendations, requirements. Also look into suggestions. I mean, if you're using a BGA, that's a 0.4 millimeter pitch. It's a bottomless, leadless component. And if the component is available as a SOT 363, for example, that'll be a cost saver for you for the customer, because they'll remove the X-ray and the additional steps the assembly house has to take during the manufacturing process. The same thing applies to double-sided versus single-sided. I mean, really look into, do you really have to have that one connector on that bottom side, which drastically changes the cost of the assembly as well as the fabrication, because now it's a double-sided assembly versus single-sided. So look into those things.
Okay. All right, so the next one is, we want to focus a little bit on the component selection as well. So Vitaly, I'm going to have you hang tight with me again here, because there's parts that we have seen at the very front end, especially when we've gone through prototyping and we're starting to scale up, where after we run through, we always will take a look at how the job ran. Were there any issues that came up along the way? Work with our customers, provide feedback to them just to help them. It's a little bit of the design for manufacturing feedback loop, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're going through that stage, there's also the component selection piece as well. Some of it I know we'll be touching on in a little bit about the types of components and the supply chain on this, but also for volume production, was there anything that you have seen with our customers and our production that is another tip on here?
Well, I mean, real estate is a fairly good question these days. Is mm-hmm. If you have a board that's 4x4 and you're trying to place 0201s or 01005s on there, is that really necessary? Yes, they are maybe a little lower cost, but not every CM out there will be able to place those 01005s for you. So look into is a 402 a more suitable component for your design, for your project.
And then also from another standpoint, during component selection, there's also sometimes the cost requirements, right? Any of our customers that we're working with, and even for us, on the supply chain side, right? We're always looking at cost and trying to minimize costs or reduce costs where we can. So from a component selection standpoint, I know you had touched on some of the packages. Have you found any other ones where that there were cost drivers on there that may be requiring additional steps like X-ray or additional type of placement considerations that the customers just need to be aware of, because there are cost pieces on there as a generalization for processing?
Yeah, I think we touched base a little bit about this previously. So X-ray is a great example. I mean, if you have a BGA or a DFN or a QFN, if the part is available in a slightly different footprint, like a SOT, like I said, or usually it's a SOT 363 or SOT 235, go with that route. That will waive the X-ray and the additional steps with your manufacturing partner.
One other area that we've noticed too, and really the past couple of years, we were going through some of allocations and some constraints with certain commodities. So lead time considerations were really a topic for us and for our customer teams as well. So that's another area for component selection. We highly recommend, when going from prototype and scaling up, is making sure that there are some alternative parts that are also listed on the bills of materials where applicable, that will rapidly help our supply chains go ahead and source what the alternates are and reduce the amount of time that we would be needing to find the possible alternates as well. We do have options. Most contract manufacturers do have options for identifying some alternates. However, typically that is still being sent back to customers for review, just to be able to provide that formal approval and to be able to assess the end application. There are some supply chain benefits as well. We have here over 10 of our strategic distributors that we work with that help us as well, both from alternative parts and then also help with pipelining. So that's something that is also a consideration when scaling up, is really being able to leverage supply chain to help with lead time considerations and then also with risk mitigation. And we'll touch on that a little bit more further in this discussion about having a reputable and strong supply chain partner to help with the ramping up. So the next part is the regulatory compliance. So at this starts at the design stage as well. And where we look at when we're looking at prototyping and also going into ramping up is, are there any unique requirements that we have to consider when we are starting to set up for assembly, also the engineering piece, also any documentation that we have to make sure that's being sent out with assemblies or with pack slips. And that is really helpful to know as early as the quotation stage. So what's really, really important, obviously, is the ITAR, because there's also requirements on who can review documentation packages, who can actually assemble components. So having those clearly marked is really important. And then also for RoHS, for REACH, what type of workmanship standards, if it's also ISO required, that will help us on, and any contract manufacturer, on how to process the orders, how to scale up, and to make sure when the shipment goes out and customers receive it, that certificates of compliance are in there. If there's any serial numbers versus lot tracking numbers, any other requirements that we need to capture are done so correctly. It can also be record retention as well. We have, depending on the industry or the compliance, we have to make sure that we also have the right record retention set up for those customers or those designs. So one thing that we stress over and over again is there are requirements that are required at ramping up at volume that many times are waived at prototype. So that is one important step that we have our customer service representatives or anybody who's working with our customers during this transition is, what is the plan for this assembly? Is it planning to ramp up? And was there anything that was waived or omitted from the first documentation package that we now need to circle back to now that it is ramping up, so we can make sure that we can successfully deliver what our customers are looking for? Vitaly, did you want to touch on also what you're seeing from your seat for quotes coming in as well?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Kelly said. It's crucially important, especially these days with the RoHS. I mean, if you're doing a prototype for 5 pieces and, lower cost is going to be the leaded versus the RoHS, but if future state that's going to, ramp up going to mass production, you definitely want to switch over to make sure that's RoHS compliant, because in order to go to Europe and, even these days in California, products must be RoHS compliant. Just something to think about.
Thank you, Vitaly. All right, so the next one that we want to touch on is testing and quality assurance. So this is not an error. There are some duplicate bullets on here because it's equally as important at this stage as well. So as you're seeing, again, we have communicate as early as possible. So the quotation stage is best. We always say less or more is better. You can never give us too much information, because there's times that we'll go ahead and save the information off for when it's time to start scaling. So send as much as you can over. We'll go through it to see what is needed for prototypes and what is needed for ramping up. And that also gives our purchasing team, our engineering team, our assembly teams That gives them also visibility on where is this product going? Is there anything that can start, meaning the fixturing, the tooling, setting up cells, the type of programming that we're doing, the type of supply chain setting up. If we know that there's going to be repeat orders, that communication is so important, because besides the cost savings, which is really, really important for our customers, also it is to streamline reorders. So there's less touch time, it's more seamless, and it's also engaging with our supply chain partners for components or any fixturing to be able to ramp up quicker when that time comes. So definitely not a duplicate bullet there. Need that throughout this whole process. And same thing with what's not applicable at prototype, but mandatory at volume. So same thing over and over again. Take a look as you're going through this product life cycle and it's ramping up. There might be something that was left out that it's now time to revisit with your assembly team or your fab team. One part that we want to highlight on here, and I know for us in Screaming Circuits, there's limited testing, although we do have Milwaukee Electronics, our parent company, who does full production volumes with all different types of testing. At the testing stage, just a reminder to flag that as you're designing and you're running through prototypes. Are there provisions for test in there? Are there any test points? Is the long-term plan for this design to go into a functional test? Is there a plan for in-circuit test? So are there access points in there? Also for software, right? So if there's going to be programmed ICs in there, so what are the plans for that long term? Is there a plan once this gets into production, instead of programming at the time of assembly? Is the plan then to have the chips pre-programmed with suppliers? So those are some things that we start talking about even at the prototype stage, to start thinking what the long game is and have customers along on that journey, because there's timing along with that as well. And then we have on here the quality assurance requirements and documentation. I think I went into that a little bit more on the last slide, but continuing to make sure that our quality assurance team is in lockstep with our customers' quality assurance team. So what is the documentation that's needed, especially going from prototype into production? Are there, is there more documentation that needs to be completed? Or is at this point, when going into production, are site visits needed to be able to see what is the manufacturing facility now for the regular home? What is that going to look like? Is there a supplier audit that's needed? Is it having more of a cadence of business reviews? Is it just purely keep providing what I'm ordering and we're good? So those are the topics that would need to be discussed. And that takes us to the end. Matt, I'll bring you back in.
Thanks, Kelly. Great job. That's some really good advice, I think, for the design phase going forward. So, like Kelly mentioned in a lot of her slides, communication with your suppliers, even at the PCB fabrication stage, that is such an important thing, especially if you're using some types of, cutting edge type of technology. Really making sure that the supplier that you've selected is engaged with your needs and your desires and able to provide feedback up front before you start really having anything built, to make sure that the design and the needs that you have are manufacturable, reliable, and, as Kelly said, assemblable. There's so many factors that consider if you're looking at costs from prototyping as well as down to manufacturing, component selection, solder mask color selection. It's something that kind of goes by the wayside a little bit, but sometimes when you're looking at fine pitch devices, solder mask color is one of those things that's just an aesthetic for the board, or a requirement for a prototype or whatever. Not working with your PCB manufacturer, If you pick a color other than green, A, it's a little more expensive, but B, sometimes on those fine pitch devices, holding a solder mask dam between those pads is something you don't consider and could eventually lead to, quality problems down the road, problems assembling, even problems with yield in the PCB manufacturing portion of it. So anything you can do to discuss with your assembly partner, your PCB manufacturing partner ahead of time to really understand where those pitfalls are and avoid them as best as possible to get the most reliable product that you want at the end of the day that fits within your cost structure is really important. So that's all I've got today. Are there any questions? I don't see anything yet in the chat function. So if you do that, now would be a good time to add those.
Any burning questions?
You must have done a great job answering everybody's questions, Kelly. Let's see. All right, I'm not seeing any questions pop up.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt, for inviting me and Vitaly to the webinar. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Vitaly, for being here and imparting your wisdom onto this wonderful group of people.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, everyone. Have a great Wednesday, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.